New updates in the Sean Diddy Combs legal saga. The rap mogul gets an official sentencing date. He gets hit with allegations from a shocking new lawsuit. A juror speaks out, and also, apparently, Diddy receives a standing ovation from inmates.
Sean Diddy Combs' life was violated, not by investigators, but by the shattering reality of his own actions. The young women who initially defended their father, clinging to the image of the loving parent.
We may have a verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, but I'll tell you what, this case, not over. No. Important hearing today, sort of. We got to talk about why. Well, Judge Arun Subramanian had sent a tentative October 3rd sentencing date for Diddy on his convictions of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Remember, that's what he was convicted of. He was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy, and he was acquitted of the 2 sex trafficking counts. But he was convicted of these prostitution charges. And at one point, there was reporting that defense counsel for Sean Combs and prosecutors, they had then agreed to switch the date to September 22nd. And we thought, okay, because today's hearing was supposed to be about expediting the October hearing. Then they agreed to September 22nd. Now apparently it's back to October 3rd. This is all over the place. Very confusing. We'll get it straightened out. I gotta say it's interesting because Combs' defense counsel had originally stated last week, when it was the October 3rd date, that they wanted that sentencing expedited, meaning they wanted it to happen sooner. And one of the things that Sean Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, had said was, quote, the mother of some of his children had passed away many years ago. These kids, the 2 daughters here sitting in the middle of Your Honor's second row, don't have a parent. Obviously referring to the death of Kim Porter in 2018, mother of Christian, Jesse, Delilah, Quincy. And by the way, remember Sean Combs was denied bail, so it wasn't even like he got to go home after the verdict. But clearly they wanted this expedited. They want his sentencing to happen as quickly as possible. They want him out of jail. They want him out of prison as soon as possible. And also it's interesting because prosecutors, they need time for the pre-sentencing investigation and report. Basically, that's when a probation officer interviews the defendant, looks at the history, the background, childhood, education, employment, criminal history, finances, the mental and physical health of the defendant. There are interviews that are conducted with family and friends. The officer looks at various court and school records, employment records, financial records. The officer could speak to the victims in the case, law enforcement that were involved in the investigation, provide all of this information in a report to the judge, because here the judge is going to have a lot of discretion when it comes to the sentence. What could a sentence look like? Well, prosecutors indicated in a filing that before even doing a pre-sentencing investigation, Combs is looking at 51 to 63 months, a little over 4 to 5 years in prison. The defense seems to be pushing for 21 to 27 months, so a little over 1.5 to 2 years. But remember, Combs has been sitting in federal lockup since September at the MDC. So if he gets time served, he really wouldn't be spending that much time behind bars. Now, of course, there are the extremes. When you talk about transportation to engage in prostitution, the maximum for each count is 10 years in prison. You stack them together, you get 20 years. Okay, based upon the facts in this case, it seems highly unlikely he would get that much. Other side, you get the idea. There's no minimum for this charge. So could he get time served and walk free? Also seems unlikely, in that you're dealing with multiple instances of transporting Jane and Cassie, the 2 victims in this case, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. You could say this is an aggravating factor.
Were finally forced to surrender to a truth too monstrous to bear. Diddy's daughters finally broke their agonizing silence, revealing disturbing secrets no one, especially their father, ever wanted the world, or them, to hear. Diddy, the mogul obsessed with control, always used his family as a fortress. The world saw his daughters, Chance, Delilah, and Jesse, immaculately presented, sitting stoically in the Manhattan federal courtroom during his criminal trial. They were the visible proof of his innocence, a silent demonstration of unwavering family support against the tide of accusations. But that fortress was breached, not by legal argument, but by the sheer, unadulterated horror of the testimony. The shocking confession was not a scripted statement. It was an agonized, physical recoil. Courtroom reports detailing the trial proceedings exposed the devastating moments when the young women were forced to abruptly excuse themselves and walk out of the courtroom. This was not due to a scheduling conflict. It happened during the most explicit and graphic
I haven't seen you in like 2 months in person.
It's been a while.
It has been a while, and you did great reporting. You're here. We did sidebar recaps every day.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get into this monumental hearing, and I'm being sarcastic, you'll see in a second, Combs' defense counsel filed a letter with the court that outlined a brand new schedule. Then after the hearing, it was changed. What was the back and forth in terms of schedules? What's happening now?
I know. To your point, Jesse, it really was a back and forth. First, it was September 22nd. Now it's October 3rd. And it was something that the judge initially put on the schedule as Diddy's sentencing hearing. And then, back and forth happened. And now it's back to October 3rd, which I like to call Mean Girls Day. And so it was a lot of kind of going on here. And a lot of us were kind of confused as to, is it going to be September? Is it going to be October? But now it's official. It's going to be October. And there's a reason for it. There's a lot of stuff, like you had just mentioned, that both sides have to kind of work through. The defense was proposing that the probation office provide the parties with a pre-sentence investigation report, or a PSR, on or before August 29th. The defense objections to the PSR report will be filed on or before September 5th. And so a bunch of documents need to be filed. Diddy needs to be interviewed. Other people need to be interviewed. But it looks like we'll hear that sentencing hearing on October 3rd. It'll be kind of a big bow to a very long case. We'll see what the judge kind of goes for in terms of the sentencing. It could be, like you had mentioned, to the lower side, to the higher side. But I hate guessing in this trial at this point, because every guess that I've made has been completely wrong. So.
No, we both agreed he would get convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, racketeering, sex trafficking, both up in the air. I'm not surprised by the jury's decision, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and Jesse, just some more to the schedule. For any post-verdict motions, the parties proposed that the defense file any post-verdict motions on or before July 30th of this year, and the government respond on or before August 20th. And then the government requests that if they be permitted to submit its summary of offense conduct on or before July 11th of 2025, and the defense doesn't object to that. So we'll see a lot more documents being filed that we're able to kind of talk about, hopefully a little bit more, but it seems that it's just a bunch of documents that'll be filed before the eventual sentencing hearing.
You know what I think is interesting? The post-trial motions. So typically speaking, those could be like a motion for a new trial, where the court would vacate the judgment and allow for a new trial, rarely granted, but may be done if the interest of justice so requires. There's a motion for judgment of acquittal, so the court could set aside the jury's verdict, allow the defendant to go free. And there's a motion to vacate, set aside, or correct a sentence, and I'm told that it's often successful for the purpose of correcting when there's a clerical error in the sentence. Now, assuming Combs has valid legal grounds to support any of this, I imagine he will file whatever motion he can for relief from either the verdict or the sentence. Then again, I don't know. He got a very favorable ruling. Yeah. Obviously, he was convicted. He's not entirely happy with it, and his defense counsel explained that. But they also, in their press conference after the verdict, they were jubilant. They were ecstatic. And I wonder if he gets a favorable sentence, is he even going to challenge this? I mean, they seem happy.
Yeah, they seem ecstatic, because the emotions that kind of ran outside of the courtroom, it was kind of double that inside the courtroom, where all the defense attorneys were hugging, they were crying. So seeing them outside in the press conference, all kind of holding hands, going up, that was just a little slice of the cake from what we all saw inside that federal courtroom. But I think it can kind of go both ways, and that's mainly because Sean Combs is still behind bars right now. The judge didn't grant him bail even after the verdict, and I think his reasoning might give us a little kind of picture into what the sentencing might possibly look like, because the judge even pointed out during his denying of Diddy's bail after his conviction, which were on counts 3 and 5, kind of talking back to what had happened in June of 2024 with Jane and the violent altercation that happened over at Jane's apartment. And so I'm thinking
testimony presented by a key witness, specifically, as a male escort detailed lurid, harrowing alleged events involving Diddy's former partner, including explicit sexual acts and alleged violence. The daughters could not remain seated. The visual of these young women, reportedly having to stand and flee the courtroom multiple times, unable to process the agonizing details of their father's alleged dark conduct, is the shocking, unspoken revelation. It is the undeniable admission that the accusations were not mere false narratives or conspiracy theories, as the family had initially publicly claimed. They were, in the most visceral sense, too real to listen to. This emotional and public breakdown changed everything for Diddy, when the trauma of his own children became the most compelling, visible evidence in the courtroom. Diddy lost his final, most critical layer of defense. He lost the ability to perpetuate the illusion that the image of the loving father was stronger than the shocking reality of the mogul's clandestine life. The truth that prevailed was the one that
Thinking if the judge is already kind of on his mind about the whole domestic violence aspect and the physical violence that was exuded from the defendant, even just last year, I think it's possible maybe the judge, even if he hears from the family, even if he hears from Sean Combs' friends, that it's possible it might be kind of a little bit of a tougher sentence than maybe the defense was expecting.
Well, look, I think the defense might be wanting to take advantage of this, right? Now, the judge said, even though I'm denying bail and I'm looking at the violence factor, it's not a preview of what I'm going to do for sentencing. But I think this is the opportunity for the defense to submit any kind of mitigating factors and have the probation officer speak to his friends and family and talk about the impact of this. I mean, we just interviewed Charlucci the other day. So I wonder if they're saying, you know what? They said to Sean Combs, listen, let's wait for October. Gives us more time to present our case to Judge Arun Subramanian. And then we had the hearing today. This monumental hearing.
Great.
You've been in court for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
This was what, like 7 seconds?
I think maybe even less than, I would say,
What
kind
happened?
of close to 5. So
Yeah.
get all the way down to the courthouse. I'm like seeing everybody
Which
from
is not
the trial.
close from here,
No,
so people know.
it's not. It's not. And it was hot outside too. So
all the way downtown,
walking
yeah.
all the way down, or not, I didn't walk all the way downtown, from the subway to the walk to the courthouse.
Okay.
Get there, check in all my stuff. I would say the security check-in was longer than the actual hearing.
Okay.
So it was a remote hearing. We didn't see Sean Combs in person. We didn't see any of the attorneys on both sides. We didn't even see the judge. And so what had happened was we get inside kind of the overflow room.
Oh, the overflow room, okay.
Yep. So we get inside the overflow room. There's a big giant screen. It's completely black, but then you hear Sean Combs' voice being like, Mark, are you there? And so it was kind of like one of those dial-in type of hearings. And so we heard Mark Agnifilo's voice. Then all of a sudden we hear the prosecution's voice. It was Christy Slavic. She was accompanied by Emily Johnson, both who work on behalf of the government. And then all of a sudden, Mark Agnifilo was kind of like, you know what, we were able to work everything out as far as our sentencing date goes. And then the judge's clerk is like, oh, okay, so both parties agree, and then this matter is adjourned.
And that was it.
Yeah.
I worried that's what was going to be because when they had the letter basically working out the date, I was like, oh, what are they going to talk about? And then after that hearing is when they switched it back to October 3rd.
Yeah.
So not much there. You didn't see Sean Combs. Okay, let's talk about some other things that have been going on. First of all, big news. There's a new lawsuit that came out against Sean Combs. Okay, this is pretty disgusting. You have this unidentified John Doe who claims that in September of 2020, so relatively recently, he, Diddy, and others, they go to this warehouse out in LA that apparently contains some of the clothes of Notorious B.I.G., the rapper who was shot and killed in 1997, Sean Combs' friend. And people start taking drugs. They start wandering around this warehouse. And this John Doe claims that Combs started watching pornography on his phone. And that is when he claims, again, warning, pretty disgusting allegation, that Combs grabbed one of Biggie's t-shirts and pleasured himself with it, into it. I don't know how the best way to explain it. And even alleging that John Doe, or insisting that John Doe finish the job, so to speak. And he then claimed Combs threw the spoiled shirt onto John Doe and said, "Rip Biggie," then left. He also claimed that 15 years earlier, Combs told him to perform oral sex on him, reportedly suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, sexual battery. Don't have a ton of information, but for somebody who has been following so many of the civil lawsuits that he now faces, 66, 67, 68, how does this fit into all of them?
Well, it seems like it's just kind of showing a pattern that all of the lawsuits seem to kind of allege of power, control, sexual pleasure, all of that stuff. I would say the timing of it is a little surprising given that it came after the verdict a little bit, but I think it kind of, again, goes to that pattern that a lot of the other civil suits
drove his daughters out in tears. The complexity of their trauma is staggering. Earlier in the legal process, they had to issue a devastating joint statement not only supporting their father but defending the memory of their late mother, Kim Porter. They condemned a purported, damaging memoir attributed to Porter, calling the claims within it false and begging for their mother's name to be protected from horrific conspiracy theories that linked Diddy to her death. This agonizing effort to shield their deceased mother's reputation while their living father faced a criminal trial illustrates the total, impossible burden placed upon them. This is the moment the most protected fortress in Sean Diddy Combs' life was breached, not by federal agents, but by the shattering, undeniable reality of his own actions. The young women who initially defended their father, clinging to the image of the benevolent parent, were ultimately forced to surrender to a truth too monstrous to bear. Diddy's daughters finally broke their agonizing silence, revealing disturbing secrets no one, especially their father, ever wanted the
we've seen, and these can be by just different attorneys too. It's not always the same attorney who's filing these suits, but it seems like they all kind of go to this pattern, it seems. But again, I'm just more surprised at the timing of it and when this was filed too.
To be clear, there are lawsuits that he's facing that contain allegations that were never discussed in any way in the criminal case.
Right.
But in the criminal case, was it ever alleged that he sexually assaulted men? Was it ever alleged that he grabbed men or forced them to do things, or was it mostly focused upon women?
Seems like it was mostly focused on women, and that being the victims in this case. I think as far as just kind of the allegations towards men were really just having to do with the escorts or the entertainers, as they were also called in the criminal trial. But for the most part, it seemed like from what we heard in the criminal trial, which I know a lot of people are a little disappointed because they thought it would be a lot more, but really it was just kind of like just different isolated incidents involving two victims, being Jane and Cassie. But it seemed like there wasn't a lot of discussion about male victims in this trial, but there were little points that were brought up in terms of like the civil matters, those including like Bonna and her civil claim, Dawn Richard and her civil claim. I think even during the cross-examination of Cassie, one of the defense attorneys, that would be Anna Esteval, she had asked, you know, was the baby oil laced? And I was thinking back to the civil claims, because a lot of civil claims had, a lot of civil suits had claimed that
And it wasn't laced.
That it was, or yeah, the civil suits claimed it was laced, but then in the criminal trial, Cassie had confirmed that the baby oil was never laced with any type of narcotics or anything like that.
By the way, Combs' legal team said in a statement to Page 6, quote, Mr. Combs' trial and acquittal on trafficking and RICO charges proves what we have been saying all along. Mr. Combs never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone. That people continue to broadcast and file false accusations, no matter how heinous and uncorroborated, is unfortunate. But Mr. Combs will not back down. He will fight for as long as necessary to win his full vindication. I talked about on a previous sidebar how he might tackle all these lawsuits, maybe motions to dismiss, maybe try to say, you know, these Jane and John Doe shouldn't proceed under pseudonyms. If you can convince a court of that, they may be reluctant to continue the case if they have to expose their identities. He might try to get rid of them at initial stages as much as possible.
And he was successful at that at the beginning too.
Yeah, a few of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about the jurors, okay? So first, a juror has spoken out since the verdict. Not surprising, we had a feeling this would happen. This unnamed juror apparently spoke to ABC and said that the public reaction to this decision, quote, is highly insulting and belittling to the jury and the deliberation process. We spent over 2 days deliberating. Our decision was based solely on the evidence presented and how the law is stated. We would have treated any defendant in the same manner regardless of who they are. I have nothing else to say. Now, you watched the jury, okay? And we'll talk about what an alternate juror had to say too, but you watched the jury. You watched them day in and day out. What do you make of that statement?
I was a little surprised by that statement, just a little bit, only because, and I shouldn't say anything surprising to me when it comes to this trial, I found that statement surprising only because we clearly had heard the same evidence. Obviously, they saw a little bit more than I saw being inside the gallery. Some of the exhibits we weren't able to see, that sort, and that included, you know, the freak-off tapes, the hotel night tapes, all of that stuff. And so I was surprised by the jury's decision, and mainly to count 2. Not as surprised.
Sex trafficking.
Yeah, sex trafficking to Cassie. Yeah, not really surprised with count 1 or even count 4 either.
So racketeering and sex trafficking.
Yeah, I know. I'm just naming the counts, not actually specifying them or anything. But I get also why the juror made that very pointed statement too, because given the backlash that this jury has faced, given that a lot of people were kind of upset with
world or them to hear. Diddy, the mogul obsessed with meticulous control and public image, always used his family as a visible shield. The world saw his daughters, Chance, Delilah, and Jessie, immaculately presented, sitting stoically in the Manhattan federal courtroom during his criminal proceedings. They were there as a powerful, silent demonstration of unwavering support against the tidal wave of horrific accusations. But that wall of defense was destroyed, not by legal argument, but by the raw, visceral content of the trial testimony. The shocking confession was not a calculated press release. It was an agonized, physical act of survival, Courtroom reports detailing the trial proceedings expose the devastating moments when the young women were forced to abruptly stand and rush out of the courtroom. This was not due to a break in the schedule. It happened during the most explicit and graphic testimony presented by a key witness, a male escort named Daniel Phillip, as Phillip detailed lurid, harrowing alleged events involving Diddy's former.
This was an important moment, though, because this is the first real opportunity he had since all of this began to substantively address the allegations, to address the charges, to address Jane, to address Cassie. This was his opportunity. He stayed silent the entire trial, as he was supposed to. He didn't take the stand. Talk to us about what he said in court today, and we weren't there. What was his tone like? How were people reacting to this? Because that wasn't captured.
Yeah, so honestly, Jesse, even right from the beginning, it was kind of a dramatic moment in a sense, because right off the bat, when the judge said, Sean Combs, I'll give you a moment, take however much time you need. And so we're all waiting for him to say the first word. Would he sit down while he's giving his impact statement? Would he stand up? We didn't know what was happening because he really took like a good minute to, I think, kind of compose himself. And then he stood up, he took a deep breath into the mic, which we did hear, which was audible. And he said right off the bat, I want to thank you for giving me a chance to speak up for myself. It's the hardest thing for me to do was to not speak throughout all of this. He wasn't one to be giving out TV interviews or talking about this case or anything like that from behind bars. Even prior to his incarceration, he didn't do any of that. And so it was interesting to hear, what was he going to say? Was he going to say Cassie Ventura's name? Was he going to say Jane? We didn't know. And so when he said right off the bat, you know, the hardest thing for me to do was not speak. I want to apologize again to Cassie Ventura for any pain that I caused emotionally or physically. I mean, we all kind of know where we were when that Intercontinental Hotel video from 2016 dropped on CNN, and that video was hard to kind of take out of anyone's mind. And so him saying right off at the top of his speech that he apologizes for any pain that he caused to Cassie emotionally or physically, that was kind of the first time we were hearing him say her name in that respect, because even when you go back to the apology video, he didn't say her name. As we learned through trial, it was kind of advised for him not to say her name. But and then when it came to Jane, he said, I would like to apologize to Jane, not using Jane's real name, but said, I didn't mean to hurt you. I would like to apologize to all of the victims of domestic violence too. So really, I think from the defense's perspective, I think that their whole kind of strategy in a way, Jesse, was to kind of get in front of the whole domestic violence aspect, something that I think that they knew the judge would take into consideration eventually when he would sentence him. And so even when Sean Combs was speaking, he said, it'll always be a burden that I'll have to carry. My actions were shameful and disgusting. I was out of control. I needed help. I didn't get the help. He said, I got lost in my journey of life. I'm not this larger than life person. I got lost in the excess. I got lost in my ego. I lost all of my businesses, my career, my reputation. I lost myself, my self-respect. I've been humble. I hate myself right now. I've been stripped down to nothing. But I think one big thing, Jesse, one notable thing that he was really kind of getting choked up on his words when he was giving his speech is when he stood up, or he was already standing up when he was giving his impact statement, but when he turned around to his family, specifically his children, he was getting very choked up. He said, I failed y'all as a father. You deserve better. Even though talking to his mother, where he said, to my mother, I failed you as a son. I'm sorry. He said, I failed my community. I wanted to be a shining example of what people could do, what we could do. If given a chance, another chance, you know, he wanted to explain to the judge that people can change. And even towards the end of his speech, Jesse, he was saying, you know, I thank the jury for my acquittal, but he still says, I take my Mann Act convictions very seriously. I want you to make an example of what a person can do if they're given another chance, because from the government's perspective, they were hoping that the judge would kind of make a case out of Sean Combs, especially given his wealth, especially given
her partner, including explicit sexual acts and alleged violence. The daughters could not remain. The visual of these young women, reportedly having to stand and flee the courtroom multiple times, unable to process the agonizing details of their father's alleged conduct, is the shocking, unspoken revelation. It is the undeniable admission that the accusations were not just false narratives or conspiracy theories. As the family had initially publicly claimed, the details were, in the most visceral sense, too horribly real to be heard by his own children. This emotional and public breakdown changed everything for Diddy, when the visible, profound trauma of his own daughters became the most compelling, undeniable evidence presented in the courtroom. Diddy lost his final, most critical layer of defense. He lost the ability to perpetuate the illusion that the public image of the loving father was stronger than the shocking reality of the mogul's clandestine life. The truth that ultimately prevailed was the one that drove his daughters out in tears and visible distress. Diddy was a master manipulator of perception. He required his children to serve as living symbols of his virtue
and his clout, and the fact that the government alleged that his conduct had been going on for such a long amount of time. And so what Sean Combs said in response to that was, I would never jeopardize being away from my family, no matter what anyone says. And I think that was kind of a little snide to the government there. He says, no matter what anyone says, I'm truly sorry. And so it felt apologetic. It did feel, to your point, Jesse, a little repetitive of the letter that he had already sent to the judge. And honestly, Jesse, it felt kind of a little similar to the apology video after the Intercontinental Hotel video had dropped too, but it seemed like he was remorseful for his actions.
That's really interesting you say that, because look, from a legal point of view, I thought it was significant that he mentioned the victims. At first, I thought he was trying to apologize for everything in a way where he wasn't directly admitting to his convictions. But he did say at the end, I take responsibility for my Mann Act convictions. I thought he might not say that directly. Like, he didn't say, I'm sorry I transported these women across state lines for the purposes of sex work. He wasn't that specific. But the fact that he did apologize for the Mann Act convictions, I thought was significant, considering some would say, oh, he may not want to jeopardize his appeal. He may not want to admit fully that he committed these crimes. But he did, in a sense. The question I had was, and you tell me, did it seem genuine? Because reading it, it felt like he was very remorseful, and him saying that he doesn't want to be made an example of about what he did, but make an example of me about what I can do, given a second chance. It felt remorseful to me. It felt credible, but I wasn't in the courtroom. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, I think kind of from the defense's perspective, it really was kind of pulling at the heartstrings to really kind of bring out the tears in a sense. So to me, it did feel a little bit that he was remorseful, but at the same time, it did also feel like this was just everything that had already been said in the many of court filings that were already submitted to the judge. And then I felt like it felt a little disingenuous at times in terms of just the language that was used, because it was so similar to not only just the letter, but to the apology video too. And so I felt like the tone was to reach for just the heartstrings. So I felt like overall, Jesse, I think he was remorseful, but I don't know if it was remorse because of his actions and the pain that he's caused to people, or it's because he's been sitting in a jail cell for the last 12 months.
Well, then we came to the judge. Judge Arun Subramanian took a 5-minute break. It was interesting because we were doing our live coverage, which, by the way, oh boy, I was hosting for 7 hours straight. So we get to the judge's decision. Takes a 5-minute break, which, by the way, our guest Serena Townsend had said, hey, listen, I was asking, does any of this affect the judge's decision? In other words, does the judge just come in there, know what he's going to do? Is he persuaded by anything that anybody says in court? It's like, well, if they take a break, they go back, they may change their sentence. 5-minute break. I was like, oh, does that mean that he changed his sentence? Comes back, delivers this sentence. And it felt a little bit like a roller coaster. You kind of got an idea of where he was going and then not. And talk to us about how he started, what he said, and what the ultimate verdict was. And then we can get into a little bit about what the impact was in court, how people reacted to it. But what did the judge say exactly regarding the sentence?